So whenever a video like this one is made looking at a specific piece of gear trying to answer the question of whether or not it can shoot cinematic video is kind of subjective in a way, right? At the end of the day, I think that the only thing that matters, whether or not you can shoot cinematic video with a specific piece of gear or a specific piece of equipment, is your own skill level. Now, it is pretty interesting to look at this drone and see whether or not it can shoot cinematic video because it's primarily used for like autonomous tracking purposes and not necessarily for cinematic video. But what I want to do in today's video is help you guys understand whether or not this is the right tool for you or not when shooting cinematic video. So what I want to do first, just to get out of the way, is show you some raw sample footage from this drone edited to some music. If you guys want to see the full uncompressed raw file coming off of this drone, I'm going to put those video clips in a download link in the description. Go ahead and check those out if you want to see them in their full resolution. And then after that, we'll go over some of the pros and cons that I've run into about why I do and why I don't like shooting cinematic video with the Skydio 2. Alright, so what did you guys think of the footage? In my opinion, it looks solid from top to bottom, so I guess if I had to answer the question that this video poses, whether or not the Skydio 2 can be used to shoot cinematic video, it would just be yes. Yes, it can be used to shoot cinematic video. Now what I want to do though is go a little bit more in depth and talk about what I like and what I don't like about this drone coming from a video shooting standpoint. I've got my pros and cons list here that I want to go over, and hopefully I can help you better understand whether or not this is the right tool for you to shoot video from the air with a drone. So I figured I'd start off with the cons just because I feel like there could be some things in here that is like a deal breaker to certain people, and you'll know right away, okay, this is not the drone for me. Let me move on and try to find something else. Now, the first thing I have here on my cons list is the controller. I really am not a fan of this thing for multiple reasons. This is actually a Parrot controller. It's the Parrot Sky Controller 3 that was used with the Parrot Anafi, and I just really don't like it. There's a lot to hate about it in my opinion. It's very small. I feel like my hands can't fit entirely on the remote comfortably. I feel like the sticks are a little bit too short. I feel like the sticks are imprecise. The controller overall just feels cheapy in my opinion. So yeah, that's the one thing, the first downfall, in my opinion, probably the biggest downfall about this drone is the controller. It's just not good. Now, the second point that I've got here on my cons list is something that I was reluctant to include. It's the fact that the drone is kind of slow, and with the top speed of 36 miles per hour, there might be a lot of people that argue that this drone is plenty fast, but when we've got drones out there like the Mavic Air that goes, 42 miles an hour, and we've got drones like the Mavic 2 that flies 45 miles an hour, that is sort of like the same form factor, you've got to wonder why this drone can't fly faster. Now, if you look on Skydio's website, it has a small little thing in parentheses there that says its top speed is 36 miles an hour when it is flying in the fully autonomous mode. But as of right now, there's no way to disable the obstacle avoidance sensors around the drone. So you can fly 36 miles an hour and the drone will avoid and dodge obstacles. But I wonder if you could potentially push this drone even faster if Skydio eventually allows us to turn off those obstacle avoidance sensors, which definitely would be something that I'd be interested in. Now, if you guys caught my previous video, which was my first flight using the remote controller, you'll know that the range topped out at about 3,500 feet until I totally lost connection. The Skydio 2 then had to return home and it came all the way back to me. And this brings up a greater issue of the transmission system just not being all that good or really all that reliable. reliable. And when you're shooting video, you want a very strong transmission system, not to fly like miles away, but if you're flying close to you within like 1,000 or 2,000 feet, you want to make sure that there is no breakup in the video coming back to your drone so you know exactly what the shot that you're shooting looks like. I hope that that makes sense, and that's why the Mavic 2 Pro is such a great video drone, because it uses OcuSync 2, and not only does it give you 5 miles of range, but if you're anywhere within a 1 mile distance of the drone, you're pretty much not going to experience any sort of breakup or any sort of lag, which is just amazing. Now moving on, that was the third point, by the way, the third point on my list. It doesn't have the best transmission system. Moving on, it shows you little information within the companion application, and this is something I think that Skydio is looking to rectify, so I'm going to include this in here right now, but I think that in the future, this is going to be a non-factor. So at first, they had no telemetry within the drone's software, so you couldn't see how high you were flying, you couldn't see your distance away, you also weren't able to see the top speed of your drone or the speed at which you were flying. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's also things that are not there and not available within the application that are very important to see, things like the pitch angle of your gimbal, things like how long you've been recording, and also you can't readily check what your camera settings or your exposure settings are right from the home screen. You've got to kind of dig through some of the menus. So look, the Skydio 2 companion application is great in its starting form, but I really need this to get better, to consider this a really good cinematic drone, and to use it over something like my Mavic 2 Pro that I can see my exposure value and my exposure settings right there from the main screen. Now, the final thing I have here as a con is that the obstacle avoidance is very limiting, and we sort of already touched on this when I said that because it is using all those sensors, the drone is not going to be able to fly possibly to its fastest top speed, because it still needs to understand what the environment is like around it and build that 3D model. But also, you can't do things like fly when there's obstacles around you when you're trying to take off. Also, you can't do things like fly when it's too dark out for the sensors to see. So while the obstacle avoidance is great, it's also very limiting, and that's why it is the final thing that I have here on my cons list. All right, so now let's move away from the bad and into the good and go over what I just absolutely love about the Skydio 2 when it comes to shooting cinematic video. The first of which is that you can really tweak how this drone flies. You can change the roll, the pitch, the yaw, and the throttle, and it's not like you can choose between like low, medium, high. You can choose down to the percentage exactly how responsive you want this drone to be, again, with the roll, the pitch, the yaw, and the throttle. So you can go from probably all the way down to 1%. I haven't gone all the way down, but you can go from 1% all the way to 100% and really tweak how this drone flies. So if you think that maybe sometimes you're rotating the drone a little bit too fast and you want to slow that down, you can. Also, you can change the gimbal sensitivity all the way from 1% to 100%. And that is just so great because it then allows you to choose and change how you shoot with this drone depending on the situation that you're in. Now, I know that everybody who loves to look at the specs of drones would probably kill me if I didn't include some sort of spec sheet or spec list here in my video. So there's a couple of things to note. First of which is that you can shoot 4K video at 60 frames per second, and also the bitrate is 100 megabits per second, both of which really set this drone up to shoot great looking video. And something that you can't include on the spec sheet, and this is the third thing I have on my pros list, is that the colors just look phenomenal in this drone. Now, I had a conversation with somebody from Skydio. I don't know if I'm allowed to share this with you guys, but I'm going to tell you anyway. They hired some people who used to work at GoPro in order to develop the color science behind this camera, and I'm really glad they did because GoPros have great colors in them, and now to have it here in the Skydio 2 is just awesome because in my opinion, it has some of the best colors out of any drone camera that I've ever used. I mean, look, I really don't want to sit here and harp on this too much, but just looking back at this raw video, the colors look great. I didn't color grade this whatsoever. And honestly, I don't think that I would have to. Maybe lift the shadows just a little bit, but still, the colors look phenomenal. Now, moving on, we have a free moving gimbal on this drone. This is what? The fourth point on my pros list. So with this drone, there's no obstruction above the gimbal. If we look at something like the Mavic, there's like a little hood or something, I guess you want to call it, that goes over top of the gimbal. And while this is great, it protects the most fragile and most delicate part of the drone in the event of a crash. It also is very limiting in the fact that we can't pitch the gimbal upwards all that much, but with this drone, with the Skydio 2, we can pitch the gimbal downwards negative 110 degrees, and then we can also point it upwards positive 45 degrees. No propellers in the shot and none of that little hood or body action getting in the way of the shot when we pitch the gimbal upwards, which is something that I love to see, especially when I'm shooting cinematic video. Now moving on, you don't have to worry about crashing. Now, I know that I was ragging on the fact that the obstacle avoidance sensors sometimes get in the way, but if you can just fly this drone and worry about getting great video and not have to worry about crashing it, it really does give you peace at mind, and it really does allow you to shoot some really incredible footage in areas that you probably wouldn't want to because you'd be afraid of crashing the drone. Now, I know that I ragged on this controller and said that I hated it from top to bottom, but there is one thing I really like about it, and it's the fact that it has these little paddles on the back in order to control which way the gimbal is looking, so the pitch of the gimbal. Using this paddle gives you such precise control. It's something I wish that every single drone manufacturer would include on their drone, because sometimes the little wheel on like the back of the Mavic remote just doesn't cut it. But this little paddle, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to control a gimbal on any drone's remote controller. Now moving on, I have got two things that I want to cover that kind of wrap up my pros list. The first of which is that they do have a pretty extensive list of cinematic skills or one-shots available within their application, the Skydio 2 companion application, and a lot of them are really good. And I don't want to get into it really in this video because I want to touch on all of these in their own separate video, go over how they all work and how operate. So stay tuned for that. But I do just want to say that the cinematic skills built into the Skydio feel like something I actually want to use, opposed to the Mavics or any of DJI's drones. Really, a lot of them feel like gimmicks, except for tripod mode. Tripod mode is really helpful. Now, the final thing I want to mention is that it's stable. This drone really does fly well in high winds. I don't notice much shake, just like a lot of the drones that DJI is making and Autel is making. They do great in the wind, or it does great in the wind. The Skydio 2 can handle some pretty high gusts of wind, and I've noticed that when I push the stick forward, it goes forward. When I push it to the right, to the left, it goes in the area or the direction that I want it to go, and it really doesn't fuss about high gusts of wind. Anyway, guys, can the Skydio 2 shoot cinematic video? Yes, it can, but is it the right tool for you? That is something for you to decide after I just went over my pros and cons list. Hopefully that helped you guys out. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.